OpenAI just released something massive, and it flew completely under the radar. 24 hours ago, they pushed a plugins framework to GitHub that fundamentally changes how ChatGPT connects to the outside world, and here's the part that matters. It's not just an incremental update. This is infrastructure-level stuff. Think of it like this. For years, ChatGPT has been trapped in a box. It can talk to you, it can write code, it can analyze text, but it couldn't actually reach out and grab data from your calendar, your email, your Slack messages, or any custom software your company uses. Plugins change that completely. They're like giving ChatGPT a set of arms and legs to interact with the real world. The framework OpenAI released lets developers build custom connections that turn ChatGPT into a genuine workflow tool, not just a chatbot you ask questions to, but an assistant that actually does things. And here's where it gets wild. The GitHub repo shows OpenAI's built this as a standardized protocol, meaning businesses can build once and deploy across multiple AI models. We are talking about the kind of architectural change that happens once every few years in tech. Most tech coverage is focused on the headline features, but nobody's really dug into what this means for the competitive landscape, or why OpenAI timing this release matters so much right now. To understand why this plugin's release is actually significant, you need to understand the core limitation ChatGPT has lived with since day one. ChatGPT's training data has a cutoff. It knows the world up until April 2024, which means it can't tell you what the stock market did today or what your company shipped last week. More critically, it has zero access to proprietary information. If you're a financial analyst and you want ChatGPT to help you analyze your company's spreadsheets, you have to manually paste the data into the chat. That's not scalable. That's not enterprise grade. Thousands of companies have tried to build AI workflows, but they hit this wall repeatedly. ChatGPT can't authenticate into your systems, can't fetch your data in real time, and can't execute actions on your behalf. So what happens? Developers build their own custom wrappers, their own interfaces, their own authentication layers, and it's a fragmented mess. Every company invents the plugin's wheel independently. OpenAI recognized this problem years ago, which is why they launched the original plugin store in 2023. But that failed. It was too siloed, too restrictive, too slow to develop for. This new GitHub release is OpenAI's reset button. They are saying, forget the walled garden. Here's an open protocol developers can build against. And here's the strategic timing nobody's talking about. This drops right as competitors like Anthropic and DeepSeek are gaining ground. OpenAI needs developers locked into their ecosystem, and plugins are the lock. All right, let's actually look at what's in the GitHub repository and why the architecture matters. OpenAI's plugins framework is built around a simple idea. Every plugin is essentially a standardized adapter. Imagine you're building a bridge between ChatGPT and, say, Salesforce. Instead of hacking together authentication, API calls, and error handling yourself, you define a manifest file that tells ChatGPT exactly what actions the plugin can perform. Here's a concrete example. You write a manifest that says this plugin can read customer records, create new deals, and pull sales forecasts. ChatGPT reads that manifest, understands the capabilities, and now when a user says, pull my Q3 sales forecast for the Northeast region, ChatGPT knows it can route that request through the plugin. The plugin handles the technical details, authentication, API calls, data formatting, and returns the result. This is genuinely elegant design. What makes it powerful is the standardization. Instead of OpenAI building plugins, they've open-sourced the specification. Any developer can build against it. The framework supports OpenAI's own models, but the protocol is agnostic enough that it could theoretically work with other large language models too. The GitHub repo includes reference implementations, testing utilities, and comprehensive documentation, not the vague stuff companies usually open source. This is production-grade code. And here's what matters commercially. OpenAI's signaling that plugins are now a first-class citizen in their roadmap, not a side project. The investment in documentation and infrastructure is real, but there's a layer most people miss entirely, and that's where the strategic advantage comes in. So this is all interesting in theory, but where does it actually matter in practice? Let me give you 3 concrete examples that show why enterprises are already paying attention. First, customer support. Imagine you're a SaaS company and your support team uses ChatGPT to draft responses. With plugins, ChatGPT can now pull the customer's account history, their recent purchases, their support tickets, all in real time. The support agent says summarize this customer's issue and draft a response, and ChatGPT now has context. It's not guessing, it's reading from your actual systems. That's a massive productivity lift. Second, sales workflows. A sales rep is on a call with a prospect. They pull up ChatGPT and ask what deals have we closed with similar companies in the medical device space in the last 6 months. ChatGPT queries your CRM through a plugin, gets the data, analyzes it, and gives an answer in seconds. That rep now has competitive intelligence at their fingertips without manually digging through Salesforce. Third example, and this is the big one, internal knowledge management. Most enterprises have thousands of internal documents, policies, and processes scattered across wikis, PDF, and email threads. A plugins framework means you can build a connector that lets ChatGPT search that knowledge base. An employee asks a question about expense policy or project methodology, and instead of digging through a filing system, they get an instant answer. These aren't speculative. Companies like Databricks and Zapier have already published how they are building exactly this. And that's why this plugin's release timing is so important right now. Here's the part of the story that explains why OpenAI released this now. They're not doing it out of generosity. They're doing it because the competitive landscape shifted dramatically in the last 18 months. DeepSeek, which is backed by Chinese venture capital, has been building inference-optimized models that cost a fraction of what GPT costs to run. Anthropic's Claude has been steadily improving and now has a genuinely strong enterprise story. And then you've got open-source models like Llama that companies can run on their own infrastructure. OpenAI's advantage used to be we have the best model and the best API. That's still true, but it's narrowing. So what's the play? Lock developers in through the ecosystem. If Slack integrates plugins, if Salesforce integrates plugins, if HubSpot integrates plugins, suddenly your entire workflow lives in ChatGPT and switching costs become astronomical. That's defensive strategy wrapped in innovation language. The smart move is to establish plugins as the de facto standard before competitors catch up. And here's what makes it a credible play. They are open sourcing the spec, which sounds counterintuitive until you realize it means more developers will build for the standard, which makes the standard more valuable, which reinforces OpenAI's position as the hub. It's the same playbook that made HTTP and JavaScript dominant in web development. Whoever gets to the open standard first usually wins. OpenAI's making that bet explicitly here. The GitHub release is saying we are going all in on this. And that commitment changes how enterprises will approach AI planning for the next 2 years. So let's get concrete about what this means if you're actually building something. The plugins release lowers the barrier to entry dramatically. Before this, building a ChatGPT integration meant doing custom work, hiring engineers, navigating authentication, handling edge cases. With a standardized plugins framework, a much smaller team can get it done. For startups, that's huge. For enterprises, that means you can move faster on AI projects that would have languished in planning phases before. But there's a darker implication nobody's discussing enough. As plugins become the standard, data flows through OpenAI's infrastructure. Your customer records, your sales forecasts, your internal policies, they're getting passed through OpenAI's systems, which means they are touching OpenAI's data residency, OpenAI's compliance framework, OpenAI's data retention policies. If you're in a regulated industry like healthcare or finance, that creates real friction. There's also the lock-in question. Once your entire workflow runs through plugins, how hard is it to switch to a different AI provider? Probably very hard. OpenAI's betting you won't want to. The third implication is architectural. The plugins protocol will likely become the industry standard within 18 months. Anyone not building for it now will be behind competitors who are. And that creates a race dynamic where companies feel forced to adopt it before they've thought through the privacy and compliance implications. Here's what you should actually do. If you're running an enterprise, start experimenting with the framework now, but do it in a sandbox environment first. Understand the implications before you go all in. If you're building a product, this is your signal to start thinking about what your plugin's integration looks like. The competitive window is short, and first movers will have an advantage. But here's the thing that actually determines whether plugins succeed or fail in the market, and it's something most coverage completely misses. If you want to actually build something with this, here's what you need to know. The plugins framework is surprisingly straightforward to get started with. You need three things. First, a manifest file. This is just JSON that describes what your plugin does. You write something like, I have 3 endpoints, get customer data, create order, and fetch inventory. Here's what each one accepts as input and returns as output. That's it. You're not doing anything fancy, you're just being explicit about what's available. Second, an open API specification. This is a standard way of describing REST APIs that's been around for years. If you've built a web service before, you've probably worked with this. You're just documenting your endpoints in a machine-readable format so ChatGPT knows how to call them. Third, authentication. You choose how your plugin authenticates to ChatGPT. You can use OAuth, API keys, or custom authentication depending on your security model. OpenAI's documentation walks through all of these. Here's the practical part. The whole getting started process probably takes a competent engineer between 4 and 8 hours from zero to working plugin. That's genuinely remarkable. Compare that to custom ChatGPT integration work from 2 years ago, which could take weeks. The GitHub repo includes code examples, testing utilities, and troubleshooting guides. It's not perfect documentation, but it's way more complete than I expected from a 24-hour release. If you're technical and curious, you should absolutely clone the repo and try building something. It'll take you an afternoon, but here's what separates a working plugin from a useful plugin, and that's the part where the real work actually starts. Here's what you should be watching for in the next 6 months. First, mainstream integrations. Slack will probably get plugin support within Q3. Salesforce will follow. Once that happens, the plugins framework goes from interesting for developers to mandatory for enterprises. That's when the real adoption curve kicks in. Second, competitors will respond. Anthropic will likely release their own plugins protocol or commit to supporting this one. DeepSeek might build plugins for their models. The standardization question gets resolved pretty fast once financial incentives align. Third, regulatory scrutiny. As data flows through plugins, regulators will ask questions. Privacy advocates will ask questions. OpenAI will probably have to clarify their data handling policies for plugins specifically. That's not a blocker, but it's a dynamic worth tracking. Fourth, and this is critical, watch for the first major plugins outage or security incident. When it happens, and statistically it will, that'll be a watershed moment for enterprise adoption. Companies will suddenly care very much about how plugins handle failures and what security guarantees they offer. Here's what this all means. We are at an inflection point where AI moves from being a chatbot you talk to into infrastructure that's woven into your actual workflows. That's fundamentally different. That's the change from novelty to operational requirement. For you personally, that means thinking about where AI could actually save you time or make your work better, and starting to experiment with plugins now before they are everywhere. For your business, it means planning for a world where ChatGPT or something like it might eventually touch customer data, sales data, and internal operations. That's not a threat necessarily, but it's a choice worth making deliberately rather than stumbling into. The plugins release is the first domino in that sequence. Watch what OpenAI ships next. You'll learn everything you need to know about where this industry is actually headed. Follow for daily AI news so you catch the moves everyone else misses.